It was a sweltering weekend in July of 1998 when 12 students from Austin decided to escape the city heat and venture into the rugged wilderness of Marble Creek, Texas. The group, a mix of close friends and classmates from the local high school, had been planning this hike for months. They carried backpacks stuffed with snacks, water, and cameras, laughing and joking as they made their way onto the trail. None of them had any idea that this ordinary adventure would mark the beginning of one of the most chilling mysteries in Texas history. Locals had long whispered about strange occurrences on the trail, but the students, full of youthful energy and curiosity, brushed off the warnings as old wives' tales. The first few hours of the hike were uneventful, filled with laughter and casual chatter. Birds chirped overhead, and the dense Texas forest offered an illusion of safety, as if shielding them from the world. They took photos at scenic overlooks, recorded video messages for their families, and even sang songs around a small clearing they found along the path. But as the day wore on, the group unknowingly ventured deeper into an area rarely explored by hikers. The trail became narrower, overgrown with thorns and fallen branches, and the familiar landmarks disappeared, replaced by a dense tangle of trees and shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. By late afternoon, the sun began to dip behind the hills, casting long, eerie shadows across the trail. The students started noticing strange sounds, branches snapping where no one was walking, rustling in the underbrush, and the occasional whisper of wind that almost sounded like voices calling their names. A few joked nervously, claiming it was just their imagination, while others felt a creeping unease settle in their chests. They pressed on, unaware that the forest around them had a way of disorienting even the most experienced hikers. As darkness began to fall, the familiar trail markers vanished, leaving them unsure of which direction to take. By evening, the students were overdue to check in with their parents, but their phones were dead or out of range, and no one could reach them. Panic began to ripple through the families as they tried calling each other, hoping for some sign of life. The local authorities were alerted, and search parties were quickly organized. Helicopters scanned the area from above, while teams of volunteers combed the dense woods below. Flashlights pierced the thick undergrowth, but the forest seemed endless, and the students had vanished without leaving a trace. It was as if the wilderness itself had swallowed them whole. Over the next several days, the search intensified. Dogs were brought in, infrared cameras were deployed, and even neighboring counties joined the effort. Despite their best efforts, nothing was found. No footprints, no abandoned gear, not even a scrap of clothing. The trail, once a place of recreation and adventure, had become a labyrinth of fear and uncertainty. Families were left devastated, communities were shaken, and theories began to emerge, each more terrifying than the last. Yet, even with all the resources and manpower thrown into the search, the 12 students remained completely missing, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt Marble Creek for decades to come. As the days turned into weeks with no sign of the missing students, the small town of Marble Creek, Texas, was gripped by a growing sense of unease. Parents paced their homes late into the night, glancing nervously at every shadow, every distant sound. The local school held assemblies, trying to calm worried students, but the fear had already taken root. Conversations in grocery stores, gas stations, and diners were dominated by speculation. No one could stop talking about the 12 teenagers who had vanished without a trace. The town's quiet streets suddenly felt oppressive, as if the forest itself had spilled its darkness into the community. Rumors began to spread like wildfire. Some townspeople whispered that the students had been kidnapped by someone with a sinister agenda, while others claimed the trail was cursed, that it had swallowed hikers before and would do so again. People reported strange occurrences around the edge of the trail. Glimpses of figures moving among the trees, unexplained noises, and even cold gusts of wind that seemed to come from nowhere. Locals who had grown up in Marble Creek started avoiding the forest entirely, convinced that venturing too far into the wilderness could lead to the same fate that had befallen the students. Media outlets picked up the story, broadcasting images of the smiling teenagers and interviews with frantic families. Each news segment added fuel to the town's anxiety, turning Marble Creek into a place of national curiosity. Paranormal enthusiasts and thrill-seekers began showing up, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious trail or capture proof of what might have happened. The townspeople were divided. Some wanted to cooperate with the investigation, while others feared that attention would only worsen the situation. For the families directly affected, every new theory or tip was both a glimmer of hope and a source of heartache. The local authorities faced increasing pressure as the mystery deepened. Search parties scoured the trail day and night, but the dense forest seemed almost alive, erasing any signs of passage. Trees fell, animals disturbed the ground, and the natural hazards of the wilderness made the investigation dangerous. Some officers reported a strange heaviness in the air, as though an unseen presence was watching them. Veterans of the force, who had seen many cases, admitted that they had never felt anything quite like this, a fear that was palpable, creeping into every corner of the search effort. Over time, Marble Creek itself began to change. The once popular trailhead was quietly blocked off, and the townspeople adapted to a sense of unease that never fully left them. Families moved cautiously, teaching their children to respect the forest and to avoid wandering too far. Even years later, stories of strange sounds, fleeting shadows, and unexplained feelings of being watched persisted. The town became a place haunted not just by the missing students, but by the unknown forces that seemed to linger in the dense, dark woods surrounding Marble Creek. Fear had taken root, and it refused to let go. Years passed, and the story of the 12 missing students faded into whispers and old newspaper clippings, remembered mostly by the families and a few locals who refused to forget. But in the summer of 2023, a new generation of explorers arrived in Marble Creek, drawn by tales of the vanished students and rumors of hidden caves deep within the forest. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and a mix of curiosity and bravado, these young adventurers set out along the now overgrown trail, determined to uncover secrets that had eluded investigators for decades. They weren't prepared for the darkness that waited for them, or the chilling feeling that the forest itself was aware of their presence. The initial hours of the hike seemed ordinary. Birds sang in the dense canopy above, and the sunlight filtered through the leaves in familiar patterns. Yet, as they pushed deeper into the forest, the trail became less defined, swallowed by undergrowth and fallen trees. The explorers relied on old maps and snippets of local lore, searching for the caves rumored to hide long-forgotten artifacts. The further they went, the more the forest seemed to tighten around them, shadows stretching unnaturally, and every sound, a rustle of leaves, a snapping branch, seemed amplified. It was as if the woods were warning them to turn back. After hours of careful trekking, the group stumbled upon something unusual, a small, narrow opening partially concealed by thick vines and jagged rocks. At first, it looked like nothing more than a hole in the earth, but a closer look revealed a passage that descended sharply into darkness. Hearts pounding, flashlights cutting through the black, they cautiously entered the cave. The air inside was cold and damp, carrying the scent of earth and decay. Every step echoed off the walls, and the deeper they went, the more oppressive the silence became, as if the forest itself had been waiting, holding its breath for decades. Inside the cave, the explorers noticed something unsettling, faint markings etched into the stone walls. At first, they seemed random, scratches and lines that could have been made by animals or weather. But as their eyes adjusted to the darkness, the patterns began to take shape. Symbols, crude drawings, and even sketches that resembled human figures. The explorers exchanged nervous glances, the reality of what they were discovering sinking in. Whoever had been here before, perhaps the missing students themselves, had left a message, a warning, or maybe something far more sinister. The cave was no longer just a geological feature. It was a frozen moment of fear and mystery, hidden away from the world for 25 years. The further they ventured, the more artifacts they uncovered, old backpacks, rusted water bottles, and worn notebooks, all eerily preserved despite decades underground. Every discovery raised more questions than answers. The markings on the walls seemed to tell a story, a narrative of entrapment, terror, and desperation. And somewhere deeper inside, the explorers sensed there was something more, a secret chamber, perhaps, or evidence of the final moments of the students. It was a discovery that would reignite the decades-old mystery, pulling the town and the nation back into a chilling narrative that refused to be forgotten. As the explorers delved deeper into the cave, the air grew heavier, carrying a damp, earthy scent mixed with something faintly metallic, like rust or old blood. The walls were slick with moisture, and every step echoed eerily, amplifying the sense that they were not alone. Their flashlights flickered over piles of debris, broken branches, tattered clothing, and old, weathered shoes, all seemingly untouched for decades. The realization hit them like a punch. These items belonged to the missing students. The cave was no ordinary hollow. It was a time capsule of terror, a place where the vanished had left traces of their existence, but no one had survived to tell the tale. What disturbed them even more were the walls themselves. Etched into the stone were crude, almost frantic carvings, faces contorted in terror, hands reaching desperately towards something unseen, and symbols that resembled spirals and twisted figures. Some of the carvings seemed to depict the students themselves, moving deeper into the darkness, their expressions frozen in fear. The more the explorers examined the walls, the more they felt a presence, as if the cave had recorded the pain and panic of those who had walked these halls before them. It wasn't just history. It felt alive, a shadow of the horror that had unfolded within. Among the scattered items, the explorers discovered notebooks and journals, their pages yellowed and brittle with age. The handwriting was frantic, filled with sketches, cryptic notes, and warnings about voices and shadows that guided the students deeper into the cave. One entry, partially smudged and barely legible, described the students feeling watched, their sense of time dissolving as the walls seemed to pulse and shift around them. It was a chilling first-hand account of a terror that had no name, an experience that defied logic. The explorers shivered as they read, realizing they were piecing together a story of fear and isolation that had remained hidden for 25 years. Deeper still, a narrow tunnel led to a small chamber, barely large enough to stand in. Here, the explorers found personal items arranged in a strange, almost ritualistic manner. A pair of shoes neatly placed, a torn backpack propped against the wall, and scraps of notebooks splayed out as if left deliberately. The placement of these items suggested intention, a story being told silently. Whoever had been here, whether the students themselves or something else entirely, had left a record. The explorers felt a growing sense of dread, as though the cave itself was warning them not to go further, but curiosity and fear propelled them forward. Every step, every discovery, seemed to amplify the cave's oppressive presence. The deeper the explorers went, the more they sensed they were trespassing into something that was never meant to be found. The combination of artifacts, carvings, and journals created an almost unbearable tension, as if the cave had trapped the students and refused to release their story. It became increasingly clear that the horrors that had occurred here were not the result of ordinary misfortune. There was a design, a dark force that had ensnared the students, leaving behind a chilling legacy that refused to be ignored. Among the scattered belongings in the cave, the explorers discovered a tattered, leather-bound journal that immediately drew their attention. The cover was worn and cracked, and the pages inside were yellowed and brittle, but the handwriting was unmistakable. One of the missing students had written it. As they carefully turned the pages, the room seemed to grow colder, and the flickering flashlight beams cast long, shifting shadows along the walls. The words told a story of fear and confusion, of students being guided by unseen forces deeper into the darkness, compelled by whispers they couldn't resist, even when every instinct screamed to turn back. The journal was filled with frantic sketches, jagged lines and distorted faces that appeared to twist and writhe as the explorers studied them. One drawing, in particular, depicted 12 small figures moving toward a dark, swirling void, their faces frozen in terror, their arms outstretched as if reaching for help. Accompanying notes spoke of the students hearing voices that promised safety, warmth, and eventual escape. Yet every promise led them deeper into the cave's labyrinthine tunnels. The descriptions were chillingly detailed. The feel of damp walls pressing close, the taste of dust and iron in their mouths, and the sensation that something unseen was always just behind them. Some passages of the journal were almost impossible to read. The handwriting descended into a frantic scrawl, with words overlapping one another and sentences abruptly cut off. The student wrote of shadows that moved independently of any light source, whispers in voices both familiar and alien, and sudden, icy gusts of wind that seemed to push them further along the tunnels. One entry read, "They say they'll set us free, but the walls are alive. I think they are listening. I think they know everything." The explorers could feel a creeping unease as they read, a sense that the same presence described decades ago might still linger in the darkness. Scattered throughout the cave, other artifacts corroborated the journal's terrifying narrative. Torn backpacks were carefully placed near jagged rocks, and shoes appeared to be positioned in deliberate patterns. Water bottles, half empty and covered in dust, suggested the students had tried to survive as best they could. But every item had an unsettling aspect, a hint that someone or something had been arranging these objects intentionally. It was as if the cave itself had been cataloguing their existence, marking each step, each attempt to survive, and ultimately, their descent into terror. The explorers could not shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every creak of stone beneath their feet, every distant drip of water, seemed amplified into a sinister echo. It became clear that the journal and the artifacts were more than mere remnants of the past. They were messages, warnings, or perhaps traps, left behind by a force that thrived in the shadows. The cave was alive with history and horror, a record of what had happened to the 12 students and a chilling invitation to anyone who dared enter. With each new discovery, the story grew darker, more disturbing, and more impossible to ignore. When news of the cave's shocking discovery spread through Marble Creek, the town was thrown into a state of disbelief and fear. Families who had spent decades mourning the missing students suddenly felt the past reopening its wounds. Parents who had once tried to convince themselves that their children were lost to a tragic accident were forced to confront the terrifying possibility that something far more sinister had occurred. Rumors swirled instantly. Some claimed the cave had been cursed all along, while others feared a human predator might have been involved. Whatever the truth, it was undeniable that the town's darkest legend had been unearthed, and Marble Creek would never feel safe again. Local authorities quickly mobilized to assess the cave and its contents, but they faced an uphill battle. The cave's passages were narrow, damp, and treacherous, and the artifacts scattered throughout made the environment emotionally charged and almost sacred. Officers reported feeling unnerved as they carefully documented every detail, sensing an oppressive energy that seemed to follow them through the tunnels. Paranormal experts were consulted to interpret the strange carvings and symbols on the walls, while historians attempted to trace the cave's past. Each expert added more layers of intrigue, but no one could provide a definitive explanation for the horrors that had unfolded there decades earlier. The families of the missing students returned to the trail in grief, fear, and desperate hope. Some came with tearful prayers, leaving flowers and candles near the cave entrance. Others were drawn by the need to find answers, to understand what had happened to their loved ones in those final days. As they stepped into the forest that had claimed their children, memories of the past mingled with the fear of the unknown. Hikers and residents reported hearing whispers that sounded like cries for help or footsteps where no one was present. It was as if the cave had not only preserved the story of the students but continued to haunt the woods surrounding Marble Creek. Media outlets from across the country descended on the town, eager to cover the chilling developments. News cameras filmed the cave entrance, the scattered artifacts, and interviews with distraught parents. The story captivated viewers nationwide, reigniting public fascination with unsolved mysteries and true horror. Yet, the attention brought an unexpected tension to Marble Creek. Tourists and amateur explorers began arriving, some hoping to catch a glimpse of the cave, while others were drawn by morbid curiosity. The town struggled to balance the need for investigation with the fear that too many outsiders could disturb a place already steeped in darkness. Meanwhile, local authorities intensified their search efforts, combing not just the cave but the surrounding forests. They catalogued every artifact, studied the carvings, and analyzed the journals found deep within the tunnels. Despite all the resources and attention, the cave revealed only fragments of the story, leaving more questions than answers. The missing students' fate, the forces that guided them deeper into the darkness, and the purpose of the strange symbols remained shrouded in mystery. Marble Creek, once a quiet town, had been thrust into the center of a chilling narrative, and the town's residents could feel the weight of decades-old horror pressing down upon them. Even after months of investigation, the cave refused to give up all its secrets. Experts, law enforcement, and historians had meticulously catalogued every artifact, every journal, and every wall carving. Yet the story of the 12 missing students remained incomplete. Some items suggested attempts at survival, scattered food wrappers, makeshift bedding, and notes hastily scribbled in panic, while others hinted at something far more sinister. Shadows moving just beyond the light of the flashlights, walls that seemed to shift when no one was looking, and symbols that defied conventional understanding. The deeper truth of what had transpired inside the cave seemed to evade even the most determined investigators. Locals who had grown up hearing the original story began to return, drawn by a mix of grief, curiosity, and fear. Older residents recounted eerie tales of hikers who had vanished for hours only to reappear without memory of what had happened. Children spoke of whispers carried on the wind, repeating names or fragments of sentences they could not understand. Every new account added to the sense that Marble Creek was more than a quiet town. It was a place where reality bent, where the forest and the cave seemed to have a life of their own. The missing student's story had embedded itself in the collective consciousness, a dark thread woven through decades of memory and rumor. Psychologists, paranormal investigators, and true crime enthusiasts speculated endlessly about the nature of the cave and the events that had unfolded within it. Some suggested it had been the work of a deranged human perpetrator, using the labyrinthine tunnels to manipulate and trap the students. Others proposed supernatural explanations, a malevolent force dwelling in the darkness, capable of luring people into its grip and keeping them imprisoned indefinitely. Regardless of the theory, every expert admitted one chilling fact. The cave had not just witnessed horror. It had somehow influenced it, preserving fear as if it were tangible, a living echo of the past. Despite the attention, new evidence seemed to appear sporadically, as though the cave itself was revealing fragments on its own schedule. Explorers found faint footprints that didn't match any of the missing students, half-buried items pointing to unseen activity, and subtle changes in the layout of tunnels that suggested the cave was more than a static space. Each discovery sparked both hope and dread. Perhaps answers were finally within reach, or perhaps the cave was feeding them glimpses of the terror it had contained for decades. The townspeople, once resigned to tragic uncertainty, were drawn back into a liminal space between curiosity and fear. Even as time passed, the mystery continued to haunt Marble Creek. The names of the 12 students became synonymous with unsolved terror, and the cave a symbol of secrets that refused to die. Whispers of the missing echoed through the town on quiet nights, and hikers reported feelings of being watched long after leaving the trail. No matter how much light was shined into the darkness, or how many artifacts were catalogued and analyzed, the full story remained elusive. It was a puzzle with pieces missing, a narrative frozen in time, and an invitation to anyone bold enough, or foolish enough, to seek answers that might never be fully revealed. As the sun sets over Marble Creek and the forest swallows the trail in shadows, the story of the 12 missing students remains unfinished. The cave has given up fragments of the past, journals, carvings, and relics frozen in time, but its deepest secrets remain hidden, as if it's guarding them jealously. Some say the students' spirits still wander the tunnels, trapped between this world and something far darker. Others whisper that the cave watches anyone who dares to enter, waiting for the next curious soul to step inside. Marble Creek may never know the full truth. Even now, hikers report strange whispers carried on the wind, shadows that move where no one should be, and an eerie feeling of being followed. The forest has a memory, and it remembers those who vanished. The cave doesn't forgive, and it doesn't forget. For those brave enough to explore, every step forward is a step into the unknown, and the unknown doesn't always want to let you go. So, if you ever find yourself standing at the edge of that forgotten trail, staring into the darkness, remember this: some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some stories are meant to haunt you forever. And in the depths of that Texas cave, the truth of what happened to the 12 students waits, quietly, patiently, and perhaps, watching you too.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.